Okay. So what I thought we'd do, well, welcome everybody, welcome back. Final session, final online session, and then next calendar year, we will, in a group, be in a room somewhere, and then we're going to get out on site. We're going to do some safe system assessing, but you're getting yourselves a nice grounding in the idea of exposure, likelihood, severity, and some human tolerance to physical force and a few other things. But I thought we'd start now. Quite a few of you have done your assignment, so thank you for those who got that in on time. Some others, I think, are just finalising the last little bits. But I thought we would take this opportunity. If somebody would like to volunteer, I can just bring Street View up. We can have a look at their intersection. They can talk through. So if you're brave enough to do that, and of course you get a prize, just pop your hand up. So put the raised hand. I'll find you, unmute you. We can't turn your camera on. You can, but you'll be able to unmute yourself. Sorry. And then we'll have a chat and we'll find your site and we'll have a little explore. Does anybody want to be the person to do that, or am I just going to randomly choose one of the sites? I'll pause and see if somebody hits that raise hand button, assuming it's available on your computer. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And hopefully you can unmute yourself now. Hello, Mark.
I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, can hear you.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. Good.
That's all right. Now, which intersection did you have?
It's a local intersection of Whiten Street and Warren Street at Seaham, just down the road from where I live.
Okay, hang on a second. I've just got to try and find it. What was it?
WIGHT.
Yeah.
ON Street, Seaham.
Yeah.
And it'll be a cross junction with Warren Street.
With Warren.
Warren.
All right. Yeah. Okay. And it turns into Fisher.
Yes, it's a cross junction.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to dive in there. Hang on a second, and then I'll share my screen, and then we'll have a chat about it. So you live just up the road, eh?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Right. Now back to share screen. I'm getting there. Sorry, it's taking me a second. Okay, is this the one? If you should come up.
That's it. That's it.
All right. I might just go up the road a little bit. Oh, looks like there's some new barriers there. Newish barriers. Okay. So let's have a look. Now, maybe explain to us a little bit about the intersection. Obviously, surrounding land use is
it's a rural farmlands. What you have to the right here is Fisher Close, and it's a rural subdivision. So they're about 5 acre lots. Mm-hmm. And to the left is Whiten Street, where that utte's coming out of. At about 30, 40 metres up the road, it turns into gravel. So it's a real low volume road that runs up into some chook sheds and farmland. And straight ahead, we're currently in a 60 zone heading north, and that just leads down into the little town or village of Seaham. And you're probably down another 300 or 400 metres and you'll get to some residential developments in a 60k speed zone. And then further up, it's...
what was the speed zone we're currently in?
Currently in 60. And we've only just back behind us, it came out of an 80. So it dropped to 60 before we got to the intersection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you've got a shared path, shared cycleway that runs down beside Warren Street as well, which you can see there on the right-hand side.
Yep.
So it's only probably a couple of 100 metres away from that speed zone change. It's a route that connects pretty much Raymond Terrace up towards Dungog, and that sort of area in Port Stephens. So you'll get a little bit of heavy vehicles running up through other. You've got quarries and that sort of stuff up north and out towards our east, towards the Pacific Highway.
Right.
I'm not quite sure what the volume of traffic is, but there's I'd at a guess 5% heavy vehicles mix on the road. So the road to the left is Whiten, which is the gravel road. That'd be a really low volume, certainly less than 500, and similar Fisher on the right-hand side is, if you scroll over to the right, you can see it's just a cul-de-sac. So there's, half a dozen or so houses in there.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
right.
it. That's the one I picked.
That's good. Right. Now let's have a run through a few of those things we wanted to talk through. In terms of what was influencing the exposure to crashes here of vehicles or pedestrians or cyclists or motorcyclists? Anything?
Well, bit of both. It's the volume of traffic on the road. There's not a lot of traffic on the side streets, but the main road, the Warren Street, runs up and down. It's probably where you get your most exposure in terms of the volume. So I looked at it from the point of view of pulling up on either side of these two intersections, then trying to cross onto Warren Street or cross it itself.
Yeah.
So the exposure would be the volume on Warren Street and the mix of heavy vehicles.
Yep. Okay.
Then
that's
the likelihood I looked at, it's currently stop signs either side of the road, and that's because of poor sight distance. So that would be a thing that would make it likely for a crash, is the limited sight distance they have from either side there.
Yep.
And the severity, because it's a cross junction, even though it's 60 kilometres an hour, it's still above that impact zone of 50 kilometres an hour for a side impact. So that's
good. All right. Well, then, good categorization of exposure likelihood and severity. There's a few little intricacies we might get into a little bit, but in terms of the exposure there. But you're right in terms of thinking about the number of vehicles, using the intersection. And your sight distance is very much a likelihood factor. So well done there. Sightline impediments, increased likelihood of crashes. Usually, although I was just reading some stuff around roundabouts and intentionally restricting sightlines, but I'm not convinced on that. I'll have to keep reading more, I think. And the severity, really good. Speeds and angles for passenger vehicles. They've done really well there. Now, what are you thinking on things that could be altered to change this in terms of exposure likelihood and or severity?
For exposure, I looked at possibly the closure of one of the legs, the low volume sections, and gain access via another alternate route. That way you're not actually exposed to that intersection.
Yep.
Warning signs and that type of things to alert people of the type of intersection that's coming up.
Yep.
The likelihood, well, because I picked poor sight distance, I've said, well, maybe we improve the sight distance. Does that affect the likelihood then if we improve that? Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. That's a good one.
And to reduce the severity, you could put a roundabout in. And then you wouldn't need to close the fourth leg. But whether that's feasible in terms of BCR, but in terms of the safe system approach, that's the ideal solution rather than a full cross intersection.
Spot on. That absolutely addresses the severity. It'll slow the vehicles, improve the angles. Well done. I mean, that's a really nice. You've obviously clearly got your head around this exposure likelihood and severity, and yet the purpose of the exercise wasn't to ensure that it was good BCR and traffic modeling works and all of that sort of stuff. But it was just to ensure that we've got that, and you've proved that well. So that's excellent. Thank you, Mark. Any other comments on this one?
The only other area in terms of, I guess, exposure, likelihood and severity would be the impact that would be on the pedestrians and cyclists that use the path. Yep. So there'd be some risks, I guess, where they cross Fisher. But given that Fisher is a very low volume cul-de-sac with good sight distance to the cycleway, that may not be as much an issue, but it certainly still is with turning traffic from Warren Street into the side streets.
Yeah, and so what do you think you could do for that one in terms of exposure likelihood and or severity?
Well, the sight lines are fairly clear. There's no vegetation or anything there, but so just the warning signs on the approaches to that side road that warns of the cycle traffic and pedestrian traffic on the side road, similar to what they've got in place.
Do you think there would be more cyclists and pedestrians or more vehicles exiting Fisher?
There'd be more pedestrians than vehicles exiting.
Wonder if you could give priority to the crossing here.
Yep.
Be an interesting one to look at.
Yeah,
but
I've never had to stop for a car. And I walk up there each day. So
yep. Okay. So that's an interesting one. I mean, in the sense here, so what we would say there is the exposure to crashes for pedestrians at that crossing point is very low because there's low volumes of vehicles. But if we were looking holistically at the intersection and only wanted to do one safe system assessment matrix, we'd probably put that down to likelihood, because if we did it for volume, it wouldn't be accounting for any pedestrians that might need to cross the road this way, which I don't think there'd be many, because it doesn't look like there's a huge
it's not.
Desire line, but there is still that, I suppose, possibility. But yeah, that's excellent. And then the severity for pedestrians there, really, it'd be about sort of thinking about any measures to slow vehicles on their exit or as they come in, if we wanted to do that. So yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate you popping the hand up and joining us for that. I might just comment on a few other things. I'll keep you on there in case you want to say anything about them. But just to sort of show people the exposure, the likelihood, severity breakdown for something like this, Mark did a beautiful job there talking about the volume of vehicles. Interestingly, at an intersection, when we actually get into the safe system assessment scoring, which we haven't done that yet, but that comes next, and it's not too hard. But for intersection crashes, because we do it by crash type, for intersection crashes, we will take the addition of the main road volume plus the side road volume to give us our exposure to intersection crashes. The fact that the side volumes are very low, we will then factor into the likelihood of crashes associated with this intersection, along with all the other things like the sight distance from the sort of dynamic visual obstruction that might be caused by this sort of left turn facility. And by dynamic visual obstruction, I mean that masking effect, where if a vehicle was sort of turning left and you were propped here, it's not going to give me exactly the right spot. A vehicle, heavy vehicle, or a large, maybe not a heavy vehicle, a vehicle coming up here, a four-wheel drive or something, goes into the left turn lane. There's a vehicle behind it that may have been masked from the exeter. So that likelihood, also things like lighting, you check what the lighting's like, the surface, the line marking, all those bits and pieces. The severity being the speed, and you can factor into that things like the actual operating speed. So if this is the sort of transition in from the 80 to the 60, and you believe, people might not have quite slowed down as much yet, that might, bump up your severity a little bit. And then we think about things like runoff road crashes. So what's the things that influence the likelihood of runoff road crashes? Could be, well, it's a straight alignment, so that's going to reduce the likelihood. Not much edge line, there's sort of edge lines, a bit faded edge lines. The presence of the trees and things, so that the fact that they're there is a likelihood factor. The fact that they're trees and they're not going to break away on impact, they're bigger than that. That's the severity aspect of the exposure likelihood severity power pole, the same there. And then, thinking about the different road users, so pedestrians and things that influence their likelihood, so good sight lines. You probably put lighting in there again, depending on how it is. The fact that vehicles may swing around here somewhat quickly because of no sort of splitter islands or anything to do that. You can make that turn quite quick, but the sight lines are fairly open to that, obviously. And the severity just being the speeds there that vehicles will enter and exit that crossing point. And you'd have a think about any other sort of pedestrian activity. So I think it's a really good example there. How far out you go in terms of the scope of something like this, well, that'll be determined on your what you're actually undertaking a safe system assessment on. We were just sort of looking at the intersection there, but if you were just doing a safe system assessment of an intersection, you'd still think about runoff road crashes, people leaving the road in the vicinity of the intersection. Okay, good. All right, thanks, Mark. What am I going to do here? Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to just pop you back into the group there. Thank you, Mark. And I'll just check the chat there, see what came in. The auxiliary lanes are a little strange, says Jamie. Yeah, so a few little bits and pieces, but that's good. You can see how you can assess these at a fairly high level, looking at the movements and the like, and some big picture stuff, and you get into a bit of detail there, a bit like an auditor, and looking at those lane configurations and layouts and the like. Okay, so I'm going to share some slides. In today's session, we're talking predominantly around vulnerable road users. We talked quite a bit in the first session about the general philosophy of the safe system, energy of crashes and those sorts of things. The second session, we honed in on the road and the roadside environment, and we were somewhat focused on passenger vehicle collisions, and that was sort of intentional in the sense that giving us this session to concentrate more on vulnerable road users, but it also is the biggest source of trauma for New South Wales at the moment, the passenger vehicle crashes. It's, vulnerable road users certainly becoming more and more of a percentage, and the vehicle features are certainly saving vehicle occupants' lives quite well these days, or getting better and better. So it's going to be a bit of a transition. Okay, nope, we're back on. Jump here. Okay, as per usual, jump in with any questions as I go or comments. I'll periodically pause and look at the chat and answer questions, or if you wanted to put your hand up to talk about something, you're more than welcome to do that. I will talk a little bit about the assignment and just a few of the things I've noticed in reading that. And when we're, as a group, next year, we'll be able to delve into some of those scoring mechanisms. The session's, we've got a recording of it available. So I think most people are pretty nicely getting their head around exposure, likelihood, and severity. The one that I think is still just a little bit challenging to some people is exposure, and that's okay. I mean, that's expected because it's a new thing to extract exposure out of likelihood, really, for risk assessments, and so we'll keep delving into that. I'll remind you what I said in the first session, which was that exposure is really about the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians, the number of cyclists, number of motorcyclists. And you'll see when we get to actually quantifying things in a safe system assessment, it's actually a bit easier to get your head around it because you're looking for numbers. What's the volume? What's the AADT? What's the number of pedestrians or number of cyclists if counts have been done or you're making an estimate of that? And then to influence it, as Mark rightly said, blocking off a leg or blocking off a level crossing in this example removes the exposure because there's no numbers of vehicles crossing at that point or that separation. Now, at what point does a separation, change likelihood to severity? So if it was a bike lane, for example, we wouldn't call that a change in exposure because the cyclist is still very exposed to potential crashes. If it goes to an off-road shared path facility, like the one in Mark's example, does that mean they're not exposed to crashes, pedestrians and cyclists if it's a shared path? Well, certainly for cyclists, you'd have to account for any that are on the road, still use the road anyway. And then in terms of pedestrians, there is a very slim chance a runoff road could get there and strike a pedestrian. But I'll show you, we've got a little fact sheet to help you along this. But exposure, one of the sort of definitions of exposure in the Australian Safe System Assessment Framework, which we haven't got to get into this, but it says AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians crossing or walking along the road. So you can see it's just brings us back to numbers. There's a bit of flexibility in the assignment because it was sort of worded what's influencing that. So if you had said, it's the major highway or it's the direct, it's on the pedestrian desire line to the shopping centre or the bus stop or whatever it is, that's okay because that's going to influence the number of people. But in a safe system assessment, an actual assessment, you're just going to be really reporting on these bits. And when you are scoring things in a safe system assessment, it is important to make sure you get some clarity around which category things fit in and the like, just to make sure we don't double count risk. There can be a temptation to double count risk unintentionally, just the way things play out. But we've created, so the Australian Safe System Assessment Framework, the document, which you've got a copy of on your memory stick, it's in Moodle, and we'll bring some printouts of it when we come up. It has some good help for you. There are some jurisdictions that have produced their own guidance that sits under the Safe System Assessment Framework. New South Wales doesn't have specific guidance at this stage. And there's a few gaps though. So we created some fact sheets to try to fill some of those gaps. There's a fact sheet on what I was mentioning there around bike facilities. So, when's a bike facility exposure or likelihood or severity, just to try and help you through that. But a few other bits and pieces in those. So they might be a good resource for you as you start to get into the safe system assessing. We're going to jump into it now. And so by the end of this module, we want you to be able to connect movement and place thinking with safe system thinking. And I'm sure a lot of you are very aware of movement and place, and certainly New South Wales has embraced the idea, and there's lots of different new guidance coming out. And I'm going to talk to some of the stuff at a very high level, a very simplistic level. Some of you will be really experts in movement and place with far greater expertise in that aspect than I have, but we'll connect that to the safe system thinking, and I'll show you why that's so important within a safe system assessment. Key characteristics for vulnerable road users being pedestrian, cyclists, and motorcyclists that align highly with safe system principles, and key risk factors for vulnerable road users, and we'll put those into exposure, likelihood, and severity, as we always do. Don't forget to count your wallies, of course. Okay, I mentioned movement and place, and movement and place, or it's sometimes called link and place, depending on where you come from, but movement and place in New South Wales. Movement and place is a concept, and what I'm going to do is actually use this Sydney road planning framework diagram. Now, it's actually an old diagram. The terms aren't quite what are used anymore. It's slightly different, but for explaining at a very high level movement and place, I think it works very well, and it's something I like to still use. So I'm going to use this one. Some of you will probably be saying, "Oh, use the latest terms or the like," but I want to be general in its thinking. And I know there is actually just recently released a nice document about movement and place and safe system for New South Wales. I'll just make a note. I'll put that in Moodle as well in the resources. Because it's a nice document and very relevant for yourselves. Okay, so movement and place as a philosophy basically says it's a strategic planning philosophy. Says at this high level, roads and streets don't just provide movement; they provide place as well. And place sort of means an area to trade, to socialize, area that generates that sense of community. So a road or a street can have high place value, high movement function. And by movement in this, we also don't just mean movement of cars or trucks. We mean movement of people and goods in whatever form they're moving. It could be public transport, it could be on bikes. So it's just movement and place. And so you should be able to take any section of the road network and categorize it according to how much movement value it has or you want it to have, and how much place value it has and you want it to have, and pick a spot. And then you get these sort of categories within that. So let's start with an easy one here that doesn't have any place value, and we don't want it to have place value, and that's a motorway. Okay, it's all about just movement, and in this case, it's the movement of vehicles, cars and trucks. Okay. Up at the other end, we have malls, pedestrian malls, and they're places. And there'd be very little movement requirement. Okay, there's maybe a little bit of pedestrian movement, being able to walk through it, and there might be a little bit of bike movement, and maybe the very occasional service vehicle picking up the rubbish bins or something, but it's pretty much just about trading, interacting, socializing, having a coffee, shopping, doing all those sorts of things. And in that broader category, places for people, we're talking about areas where really they do have a lot of that trading and pubs and bars and markets and all those sorts of things. Then we have areas of low place value, low movement requirements or value as well. Local streets. Obviously, I wouldn't say to the local resident or local street, we say you have low place value in this area. It's more that societal, whole of society designation of that. Movement corridors being big arterials often, or potentially cycleways, or cycleways might even fit into here depending how they're done. But cycleways, big arterial roads, and then vibrant streets. Vibrant streets as a category is really, well, it's a tough one to deal with. But vibrant streets are the ones that tend to have that high place value, high movement function, and they're often the high streets or the like, and they've got the public transport route, and bikes and pedestrians and shops and bars, but they're still the main traffic route, and trying to do everything with a section of road. So in a safe system assessment, we want to understand where a road or a project fits within its movement and place framework, not for the purpose of altering how we assess it, because we assess it in a very sort of clinical way in terms of we're just looking at what is the exposure to crashes, what is the likelihood of crashes, and what is the severity of crashes. It doesn't matter how you categorized it, because it's what we believe will happen. But there's this extra bit to a safe system assessment, which is to provide some recommendations, some ideas on how to improve alignment with safe system principles. And in order to do that, you really want to understand some of these strategic planning objectives, or these planning objectives of a road. Because I can get you close to safe system, closer to full safe system alignment, or better alignment with safe system principles in a number of different ways, but they will impact on the movement and place categorization. So I can get pretty good alignment with safe system principles from a vibrant street by putting up barriers, roadside barriers with maybe pedestrian bits on top of them, so pedestrians really can't get into the street, can't cross the street, and build some big overpasses, right? By doing that, I'm going to get better alignment with safe system principles. Pedestrians, I probably won't be exposed to crashes there, so the exposure is low, so the risk is going to be very low for pedestrian crashes. It's going to turn it more into a movement corridor for vehicles then. It's going to really not at all, because it is going to reduce the place value of the area. It's not going to be a nice place to hang out, to trade, to interact, because it would be very cordoned off. So that's just an example there of why you'd be thinking, okay, so maybe then if we want to have more place value, we play with the speed and try to do speed calming measures and other bits and pieces. So it's all about the recommendations, really, is why we want to delve into the movement in place. It may help us a little bit with understanding some of the risks that may present, but really for good, appropriate recommendations. And it's exciting to see lots of different little pop-up things occurring, which are taking areas probably from vibrant streets or others and giving them more and more place value, becoming more and more places for people. Here you go, some planter boxes popped in there and those sorts of things. But let's do this, actually. I'll come back to that. And I'll give you a bit of time shortly to have a stretch. This one we'll do fairly quickly, but then one of the ones coming up, I'm going to give you a good 5 minutes so you can have your stretch and fill your coffee up and things. But if we've got an area and we've designated it as a place for people, it's designated in the place for people category, and we're aspiring to make this really, really good from that movement and place perspective. And this is it here, where it's an artistic impression of it. You can see there 40 km/h speed limit, it's got pedestrians, got bike riders, cars. The question I'm going to ask you and get you to do shortly is to come up with things you can alter in this artistic impression that improve alignment with safe system principles, so get us better safety, but also increase the place value here. So yeah, thinking about treatments that improve place value as well. Now, because we are in safe system assessment mode, when you say something like that, I also, whatever idea you come up with, I want you to put in brackets after it, either an E for exposure, an L for likelihood, or an S for severity. So you might say, I don't know, improve the lighting, which you wouldn't probably say, but seems to be good lighting there, and then we don't know what it's like. But if you said something like that, improve lighting, brackets L, I would know, okay, improve lighting, yeah, alter the likelihood of crashes. So yeah, okay, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to have a think about that. As I say, I will do this similar exercise in a few more slides where I'll give you a bit more time, so you'll be able to fill your coffee up on the next one. But let's go with this one. I'll just pause and see what anybody comes up with in alterations in this hypothetical example. Okay, seeing some good ideas coming in. Thank you. Okay, so we're seeing, and thank you to people who are putting exposure or likelihood or severity in there. And you're doing a good job of that. So a lot of people popping in things like, well, hang on, a few more coming in. This is good. Okay, so I can see quite a few people talking about things like stopping vehicles getting in there. And I think that is a great place to start. When you have a place for people, it's in that category or whatever that name is for it these days, the idea of restricting vehicles through an area and changing the exposure to crashes is a great place to start. We've just identified it as not a movement corridor. Thus, if there are other ways to move through there, that's good. Now, others then have gone along a similar line and looking at, can it be made into a shared zone? So essentially an area where pedestrians have priority through the whole area, and the guidance around that would really be to make it not look like a road. You've got some very specific guidance in New South Wales on that type of when you can and can't use shared zones. But the idea there is really that cars are the odd one out to a degree, and that's going to make it more and more a place again, and still get us very good safe system alignment, assuming we have the speeds to go with it. Then some people have sort of played around with the idea of different lanes, be it a bike lane, a bus lane, or the like. Now, by doing that, you've immediately you've created a movement as a priority for this road, movement of whichever it was, cyclists or buses or the like. So that it has more movement function to it, but it may still fit within that place for people category, but it's just sitting up a little bit higher. If I go back a couple of slides, well, if I go back to here, that would be starting to creep us up here in terms of movement as we do that. So if we determine actually there's a real movement requirement for cyclists through the area, then we're providing that dedicated cycle facility. An interesting one in there on one way, and what will making this one way impact in terms of exposure likelihood or severity? Well, it depends whether the one way is going to alter the traffic volume, and you'd need some modelling to do that. I mean, if you made the road next to it the other one way and it just same traffic volume, it was just that they moved to that, then it wouldn't change the exposure. It might change the likelihood of crashes through a one way to look for crossing and a few other things. It may increase speeds though, so you might need to factor that in. The idea of crossing points and raised pedestrian crossing points, so wombat crossings and those sorts of things have come in, and I think those are very they're very nice ideas, and they certainly have nice alignment with safe system principles. Again, though, they really it's then a road for cars and for the movement of cars, and the pedestrians have their place to cross the movement corridor. That's the way you'd think about it if you're putting pedestrian crossings in. So it's still probably within that place for people categorization, but it's sort of stretching us out of there over here in terms of you're starting to lose a bit of place value by doing that in that particular way. It'd be better to have that shared zone if you could. That's further up in the place. But nonetheless, I think we've got some great comments in there. I'm not going to go through everybody's. I think you're proving that you've got your head around this concept already, and you're very good at your exposure likelihood and severity, which I'm pretty excited by. So artistic impression there, and like any artistic impression, take it with a grain of salt. But widening the footpath, which I saw in a couple of people's ideas, that's obviously going to improve the place value of it. Shorter crossing distances. This one they do have a crossing point, which I don't think they would need if that was a shared zone. That's quite a nice shared zone. Could be, or different surface treatment and the like as it is, but you can immediately see that this is going to improve the place value, and it's going to improve safety. It's going to be a higher alignment with safe system principles. As I mentioned, as the movement requirements go up, and some of you already had sort of maybe more this in mind, you're creating these dedicated facilities, but still really trying to cater for good areas for playing, socializing, trading, low speed still of any vehicles moving through the area. We're into those local streets. The local street sort of category, where we're really saying that there's not a major movement required. Of course, there is movement required through there to get people to their houses and for the rubbish truck to get in and those sorts of things. And there's not a huge place value to it. It's not like we're seeing trading cafes and there'll be occasional cafe or things, but really not this hub of activity like the places for people. In these scenarios, we're really starting to prioritise the protection of vulnerable road users, because there will be vulnerable road users in the area, in terms of our limiting design factor. And we should be thinking of those speeds of vehicles to keep them within those ranges we want for tolerance to physical force. So in a scenario like this, which is, well, it's fairly dense, fairly dense residential environment is an artistic impression. But you'll see it sort of moves to similar sort of stuff, but with a bit more movement facilitated through there. But speed's very, very low still, so 20, maybe 30, 20 or 30 through there is very nice. We're not trying to make it so people can run through there or get through there quickly. In fact, actively discouraging that because it's in that, so it doesn't have that movement requirement. But let's talk about vibrant streets. This is a tougher category, really, really tough in the sense that we want both movement and place. So this is the one I'm going to give you a good 5 minutes on, because I want you to go and have a stretch and fill the water up. So we're seeing here a large sort of arterial road going through an area, and what do we got there? We've got a pedestrian overpass. We've got pedestrians, we've got cyclists, we've got people crossing. There's a bit of pedestrian fencing in a few areas there. We're going to do the same exercise, but what we're saying is we want to change this, alter this environment, and we want it to have high place value as well as high movement. So we want to sit it really in that vibrant streets category. It's the same thing, just come up with your ideas on alterations here. But remember, when we make these alterations, we want to increase the place value and movement for all road users. So 5 minutes and fill your water up, and we'll get back to you in 5. Right, another minute to go, and I'll get people to start jotting down a few ideas into the chat again, popping exposure, likelihood, and severity in there. I'll give it another 30 seconds. People to jot an idea or two down on how we get better alignment with safe system principles out of this area, and we also get it into that high place value, still high movement corridor. Okay. Right, really good stuff I'm seeing coming in here, and that again just reinforces that I think this group's very well placed, and it's just a little bit of, I suppose, thinking around how do we get that high place value as well as high movement. It can be quite challenging, and it does depend exactly which one has a bit more priority. And I suppose that's a point that I often make, is that if I find myself doing an assessment or the like, or even talking to strategic planners, and it's a road sitting up in this category, I'll often ask if that they could give any indication, if anything that could be done to shift it into a bit more in one of these categories, because that really helps in how we can treat the area. But seeing lots of ideas around there. Most people seem pretty comfortable to get those speeds down a little bit, or there's quite a few comments on that, reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes if speed of passenger vehicles could be brought down. And I think that's really good. And if we are trying to create that place value, the speeds are going to have to be lower if there's any of this mixing. There seemed to be a little bit of interest in taking some traffic lanes to convert to other type lanes, bicycles, public transport. And again, those are really good ways to continue to get movement of people and goods through the area, not necessarily all with car lanes, and it can give us some good place value benefits as well. Bit of discussion about blocking pedestrians off from crossing and making them use the overpass, or some people didn't seem to have that as what they were thinking. And that becomes an interesting one, because as we talked about earlier, the blocking off of pedestrians and then the forcing them into overpasses and those sort of things, or underpasses, is a bit of an erosion of place value. So a little bit of a trade-off in thinking about where it actually sits here, and how it can be done. But most things with a high place value wouldn't have a grade separation of pedestrians unless it was somehow done in an extremely, really clever way to give it place value at that in that area or the like. Let's just have a look again at the artistic impression of this one, and yeah, take it with a grain of salt. But you can see we're still getting good movement through there in terms of bikes, pedestrians, vehicles, public transport. Yeah, your traffic volume's going to be down in this scenario, but we're also seeing some quite good speed reductions through there. Now, in our, I suppose, very traditional sense of movement, if you were thinking of just passenger vehicle speed through there and you did your microsimulation modeling or the like, or you did your SIDRA analysis and things, it probably wouldn't come out as good for the cars. But certainly for other road users traveling through there in public transport, bikes, and the like, and plus we get all the place value of it and much better alignment with safe system principles. Thinking also about slowing vehicles through the intersections with raised bits and pieces, potential for different speeds and carriageways closer to pedestrian areas and the like. So I think it's a nice little, nice artistic impression. And we are seeing some of it, and we're seeing things like protected intersections coming out, so creating those areas for other road users to keep that movement, but also do it in a high safe system alignment. I'll talk about this a little bit more, these sort of protected intersections and those sorts of things later. But certainly, around New South Wales, we're seeing a lot more of this this sort of stuff. And when we do some sort of facility like this for bikes, which is really a pretty good movement corridor for bikes, it has a little bit of place value addition to it. But are we categorizing that as exposure, likelihood, and severity? I would categorize that as likelihood of crash, reduced likelihood of crash by the installation of this for bikes. The reason I'd say that is that vehicles can enter that quite easily. If somebody was on their phone or drifted out of their lane or the like, they could quite easily enter that. Also, there's the points of turning in and coming out, which provides that conflict with passenger vehicles. So that's why I'd be saying it's less likely there's a crash, but there's certainly still the exposure. And so the exposure for cyclists to crashes would be just the number of cyclists using that. When we get into the movement corridors, this is where we can really start to look at things that we don't want to intentionally erode the place value, but there's no need for the requirements to preserve that place value because it's on the way down. And so we could do things like fencing through here to stop pedestrians crossing, barriers if we wanted. If we decided it was a cycle way, or cyclists had a movement required on this route, if they didn't maybe have a parallel route that was decided for that, you'd do the same. You'd be creating dedicated cycle lanes or protected off areas, which is just cyclists having a quick run through. Grade separations, sure, yep, they're on the cards, underpasses for pedestrians and the like. And still though, if there's conflict points that are there, we want to try to reduce speeds down to thinking about the crash types and getting them within those tolerances. So this is where raised intersections between these two, big traffic movement corridors still come down to an appropriate safe system speed, as we looked at in the last module. So pedestrians and cyclists, obviously our most vulnerable road users. Severe injury risk around 10% at that 20 to 30 kilometre per hour mark. Death sort of almost certain, a direct strike of a pedestrian around that 50 kilometres per hour. Young and old are even more vulnerable, and you can factor that into your safe system assessing if you do have a lot of elderly or a lot of young people, you can factor that in a little bit in your severity scoring. And we really want to aim to manage speeds to around that 20 km/h mark if possible, where pedestrian volumes and cyclist volumes are high, otherwise try to separate. So it can be challenging, obviously, but the philosophy is sort of there. But the separation is providing us with quite a good opportunity. There's lots of new ways coming out and how it can be done, lots of great guidance documents from New South Wales about how we're providing better bike facilities, separated facilities, Copenhagen style lanes like this, where we push the parking out and bikes can run on curbside. And how to treat roundabouts in terms of, we know roundabouts are doing a good job in reducing the severity of crashes for passenger vehicles. For pedestrians and cyclists, they can be a little more challenging sometimes, and we do know that there's reduction in severity of crashes for pedestrians, and pedestrians at least. There's research behind that, but pedestrians really don't like crossing there. It erodes place value for them because they have a more challenging crossing. It's more challenging to cross. So the things like these protected roundabouts are quite good in terms of reducing the likelihood of crashes for cyclists, vehicles and pedestrians, and the severity of crashes is very low with the slowing of vehicles on the approach to the roundabout, but also the raised crossing point and going around it. This one's the Moray Street one, which has been built. So essentially, a cyclist wanting to do a right turn comes around and does that, and off they go. Priority for cyclists, priority for pedestrians. Give way signs essentially makes this a road in its own right. The bike facility is a road in its own right. I'm going to try to provide enough sort of storage area for one vehicle to prop there to get out of the roundabout way, but a lot of these sort of treatments being installed, not necessarily with the bike lane. The bike lane's the new one, the new bit, but pedestrian crossings around roundabouts is fairly common. Lots of those out there. Some people get quite frustrated by this idea or don't like it because of the potential for passenger vehicles to sort of come in here and then store, and then it's going to clog up the intersection. And again, it's back to your sort of, what is the purpose of the road, and what is this area in terms of road users. One local government that I'm doing some work with, they've pretty much got a standard letter that says, yeah, thanks for your complaint about the not being able to drive around this roundabout near the market and get there through there as quickly as you want. We suggest you use alternate forms of transport next time you come to the area. And it's you sort of think, wow, but that's there. They could not be more clear in their strategic documents that area is. They want pedestrians, they want cyclists. They don't want people driving their own cars there. And yes, some are going to have to because they don't have other forms. But yeah, quite an interesting approach. Yeah, similar concepts been developed for higher speed roundabouts where bikes can sort of utilize some sort of priority across a more minor leg. If they they can keep going that way, or if they want to turn, the major road still may be having priority there. So there's a bit of intricacy in that, and then they would stage their crossing across there. That one hasn't been built yet, but there's concepts floating around. In terms of cycling treatments, I like this little adaptation of a Dutch diagram, but it's really saying we can get that sharing of vehicles and bikes in low speed environments, and represented by this symbol. I'll give a prize. I haven't given the prize out for a bit. Hey, what's that symbol called? I just want to pop that in. We're not used a huge amount in New South Wales. Okay. It is a Sharrow. Sergeant Cycle. I like it. I might give Billo there a prize just for entertainment. It's called a Sharrow, stands for shared arrow, and it designates points where cyclists and vehicles share the same road space as a warning to drivers. But low speeds, that principle of sharing sort of spaces. But then as soon as you're up above around that 30km/h mark, you want some physical separation there. You want some physical separation. You might want to use your parking as a separator as well, but physical separation. And then when we're up even higher than that, above the 70, it's full off-road facilities is what we should be aspiring to. Again, sort of high-level conceptual stuff here. But hopefully that sparks a bit of thinking. Okay, pedestrians. Pedestrians, let's have a brief chat about pedestrians and then motorcyclists, and then I'll give you a little bit of time to do your quiz and finish off your assignment for those who haven't managed to get that done yet. So pedestrians, we talked about wombat crossings in the early part of it, a raised pedestrian crossing. Here's one out of another country, which is red, but they don't need to be red, obviously. But the idea that a zebra crossing in its own right, or a pedestrian crossing being its official name, just the stripes not raised, is a road safety treatment, is not really accurate. It's not, it's, you know, in some cases it may assist, but in a lot of cases it actually makes things worse from a road safety perspective. And that's because we have this, hopefully the priority is clear, but we have vehicles coming at speed and pedestrians crossing with less alertness of their requirements. Well, they don't have to give way because it's their priority, but anyway, we don't see great stuff in terms of road safety out of at-grade pedestrian crossings. We do, however, see amazing stuff when it's raised like this. And vehicles have to slow down on their approach, navigate over it. Pedestrians also sitting up a bit higher, better line of sight. Also good for mobility for people in wheelchairs or older people, not having to go down and then up to cross the road, and quite a few other. But it really sits very well in safe system alignment due to the reduced severity of crashes, but also the reduced likelihood of crashes. And I sort of have this, if you've got an area that's got enough pedestrian activity to have a pedestrian crossing, it's got enough pedestrian activity to raise it as well. Now, you might say, well, what, buses or other, things like this going through the area. Well, there's the buses and raised anything causes all sorts of trouble. Most buses do very well going over raised features like this, but there are the options to do things like cushions on the approach instead of raised, which would slow vehicles on the approach. The buses could straddle it, and that would still give us the reduction in severity that we're looking for. So we'd have a pretty good aligned safe system treatment there. So cushions on the approach if you really can't go to the wombat crossing. Another little tip is if you are going to do cushions, do them on both sides there. Just if you do them on one side, a lot of drivers will just go around and they can cause some challenges. Does that count as a wally, as in a wombat? Very good. No, it does not. That was no wally there. This little photo analogy out of Adelaide from quite a few years back, I find quite interesting, and it shows that we know what a safe system for a vulnerable road user looks like. But this is a construction site, obviously. They're doing some works down here in the some electrical works in the conduits and doing those bits and pieces. So they're out there working away different areas for a week or so. So in order to keep the workers safe, there was a reduced speed limit. Back in the day, it was 60 kilometres per hour through there, but it went down to 25 kilometres per hour because that's the South Australian speed limit for work zones. 25 kilometre per hour. Barriers are up. The workers go about their business, working away. They finish everything they need. Then speed limit goes back up to 60. Barriers are all removed. And about 3,000 pedestrians a day stand pretty much where the workers were and cross the road. So you sort of say, well, why are we affording the workers such a high level of safety and not the people just trying to cross the road, the public? And some people might say, well, the workers are concentrating on their work, they're not looking for traffic and the like. But you know what, the pedestrians are concentrating on their phone, and some of them are intoxicated, and some of them are just not aware of their surrounds for one reason or another. So we know what we need to do in terms of the level of sort of safety for a vulnerable road user. We just don't give that to the general public. And we want to try to shift things to closer to this. And, it's not going to look like this particularly, but the same sort of thinking should go into it in risk management. But we do see different areas around Australia with different things, which are getting better and better protection for any vulnerable road users in the road. Interesting one around any public transport facilities. So this is obviously trams or light rail, but works the same for buses, for rail stations as well. There is a huge increase in pedestrian likelihood of crashes around public transport facilities due to people running for their bus or their tram. And their propensity to take risk at this point in time just goes off the charts. So if you are doing a safe system assessment around any public transport facility like that, where they can see their tram or their bus coming, or their train for that matter, pedestrian risk, the likelihood of crash is way up. The severity of crash will depend on the speed of the vehicles going through and the like. And raising intersections, raising areas are really effective. And one of the things I'm sure you're going to take out of this is the effectiveness of raised intersections, raised crossing points to slow vehicles down at these points. Here's an example of raised intersection around, where's this one, down in Tassie. Good use of some bollards here as well, just a little design feature for those thinking about raised intersections, because obviously you lose your curb there, so vehicles don't encroach on pedestrian areas. You need to put those bollards out there just as a little way to make sure vehicles are taking that appropriate line around. And again, vehicles coming in, we saw Mark's wonderful example there. Obviously a very different road environment to this, but with the crossing point of the shared path was back a little bit. The ability to put some sort of pedestrian priority, cycle priority through there was there. I mean, very low volume, so maybe not needed, but providing a nice sort of storage area for that first vehicle to come around and pause is good as well in these more built up environments. But we're seeing there that raised is reduced likelihood, reduced severity of crashes. And reduction in speed limit is very effective in reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes. Here's actually the default speed limit being changed from 60 to 50, and the number of casualty crashes per year there. So you can see, I mean, step change in that one, isn't it? Pause there and see if we've got any questions. Okay, I'm going to talk about motorcyclists and then give you some time to finish off everything before we pick it up again when I arrive. So thinking about motorcyclists, they're a slightly different beast in terms of what we're trying to do in our safe system alignment. I like to think of 5 S's: sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed. So that's, can a motorcyclist be seen? And can the motorcyclist see what's coming up? Is the surface appropriate for traction for the motorcyclist? Have we got good signs to warn, inform, guide? Strike is, what is the motorcyclist going to hit and how bad is that going to be? Or what is going to hit the motorcyclist? And speed, obviously speed of motorcycles, but also speed of other vehicles around the motorcycles. And if we take those into our likelihood and severity, the sight, and being able to see the motorcyclist, the surface that the rider's on, and the signs, the warning signs, the informing signs, the guiding signs, they're all trying to reduce the likelihood of crashes. The strike, now a crash is happening. It's all about trying to reduce the severity of that crash. The speed's our magic one there in impacting both the likelihood and the severity of crashes. Now, there's been some recent research released on the motorcycle injury curves from 2019 research, which has come out and slightly alters the way we look at them. And I've popped those into your on your memory stick. I'll put the reference down here if you want to have a look at the full research report. But it's quite interesting stuff, looking at Maze 3, which is high-level serious injury and fatality, plus F, or 4 different crash types: impacts with barriers, trees and posts, embankments. I'll talk a little bit about barriers shortly with motorcyclists, because I'm often an area of interest. So let me just go through these 5 S's very briefly. We'll talk about them, just touch on them, so you've got a few ideas in your mind when we get into doing safe system assessments and you're asked to specifically think about motorcyclists. So, sight, likelihood. Motorcyclists are obviously smaller than other road users, can be hidden behind things that other vehicles may not be hidden behind, and you might be able to see there the motorcyclist just hiding behind the tree there. And it could be that a very brief look from a driver and a signal controller box, a tree, a shrub, or the like is blocking sight lines, and that So when you're analysing crash potential for motorcyclists, thinking about that, those obstructions of sight lines, also the fact that motorcyclists will be easier hidden behind other vehicles or the like in that dynamic visual obstruction type crash. The surface. So motorcyclists obviously lean when going around a curve or a corner, and the 2 contact patches, 2 small contact patches on the road surface, mean that the motorcyclist is extremely susceptible to surface deficiencies. far more than any other road user. I mean, cyclists are quite susceptible to surface use, but not usually traveling at the speeds of motorcyclists. So you can see there the lean of the rider and a sort of center of gravity, and so as if the wheels were to slip, the rider would be down. Often people refer to motorcyclists as the canary in the coal mine when it comes to road surface deficiencies, in the sense they're first to be killed or seriously injured when things are starting to go bad. And also just thinking about what is placed on the road, be it steel plates like this, or pit lids, depressed pit lids, and any other things we're putting out there. And you might look at it and go, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? They're going to see it. They're going to slow down. You do have to think of those different scenarios of night, maybe a little bit wet at night. Maybe the motorcyclist is following behind another vehicle, so it doesn't see this until late. It's a bit slippery. And so the likelihood of motorcycle crash goes up when we have these surface defects or surface changes. So you can get a skid resistant surface over that. Ideally, you don't have these big metal plates, but there is a skid resistant surfacing you can put on metal plates. Motorcyclists are really quite tuned in to signage, and we have a great ability to reduce the likelihood of motorcycle crashes using signage, more than other road users, so quite well attuned. But it becomes important that we get our signage consistent, especially things like chevron alignment markers, curve advisories, and the like. We can talk specifically motorcyclists with a motorcycle specific warning sign or the like, which again is showing to be very effective from some New Zealand research, where you'd put a supplementary plate on the specific issue for motorcyclists. So it could be surface defect, between the time it's identified and the time that it's actually been able to be rectified, or it could be some other specific thing for motorcyclists. We were talking about strike hazard for motorcyclists. It's a challenging thing. I showed you those injury curves for motorcyclists at the start. And motorcyclists, they can withstand a bit more than a pedestrian or cyclist, but nowhere near what a passenger vehicle occupant can withstand, because they just don't have that shell. But a little bit more than pedestrians and cyclists, where even with the helmet and even body armor and leathers and the like, nowhere near what a passenger vehicle can handle. But we do have some features out there that we can lessen the severity of motorcycle crashes, ways to absorb energy, to redirect the errant rider, and there's a motorcycle crash test protocol for barrier systems. It's a European crash test protocol. It's what we basically use in Australia as well. So here's a Crash Lab Transport for New South Wales motorcycle crash test into a barrier. Now, the test, I haven't hit play yet. The test is conducted at 60 kilometres an hour. Well, it's actually 60 and a 70. 60 kilometres per hour, you're about to see, 25-degree angle, and you slide the motorcycle dummy, which is, as you can see at the top there, which is a normal crash test dummy with slight modifications, but like it's a thumbs so it can hold a bike and a few other little bits and pieces. Put in leathers and slide it on a sled at the post, and then stop the sled, and the rider slides, or the dummy slides and hits the post. And then the second test is in between the posts. Now, this is really to have a look at underrun protection. So putting devices under the W beam or to try to act as devices. That's why you do in between the posts as well. But let's have a look at this. So 60 kilometre per hour direct strike into a post. That dummy was a write-off in this. But then when there's an underrun protection, we can see that energy is absorbed. the rider, deflects along the system. There's a bit of cushioning, absorbing of energy, and redirection of energy along the system. And so we can see a reduced severity of crash by the addition of the under-run protection, the rub rail. And there's rub rails now available, or under-run protection available to be fitted to flexible W-beam systems. So each of the proprietary flexible W-beam, Ram Shield has Biker Shield as their one, and EasyGuard has can't remember off the top of my head. Each of them has their own specific under-run protection product. So just have a look at that, and they've all been tested and passed this protocol. Before I jump into speed, I might just address a couple of myths around motorcyclists and barrier systems, and one particularly being wire rope barrier systems. In fact, University of New South Wales has done the most research in this, and over the past sort of 10 years, a huge amount of research into motorcyclists striking barrier systems of all different types. And what they've discovered is that motorcyclist strikes with wire rope systems are, first of all, extremely rare. Okay. And the reason why they're extremely rare is that motorcyclists tend to leave the road on windy roads. We don't put wire rope barrier systems on windy roads because, well, we can't. I mean, if you were to have a curve like that, so we're looking down on it, and we put a barrier system around that curve, if we were to put a wire rope system and then tension it up, because that's what those systems are. They're a barrier in tension. And you tension and tension and tension, well, what's going to happen? It's going to want to pop into the middle of the road there. And you do that. There's there's a minimum radius of 200 for wire rope safety barrier systems. And even at a 200, when you tension up your barrier, you watch the posts they want to go. The posts want to go. So we don't use it on our very popular motorcycle touring routes where we do see a lot of motorcyclists run off road crashes, like Oxley Highway, Waterfall Way. I can't think of any other iconic ones in New South Wales off the top of my head now, but Great Ocean Road in Victoria and those sorts of ones. So the wire rope systems are really used on those long, relatively straight highways. It's relatively straight. The idea that a motorcyclist will lose control and slide off and hit the barrier is low. So that's one thing. Second one is there's quite a bit of analysis of the small number of crashes that have happened with motorcyclists and wire rope systems. And there have been some. I'm not going to say they haven't. But the wires haven't played a role. The posts themselves have caused the damage, or the rider's sort of hit it and gone over the top. So those, so what can be done around those? And Ken's asked a really good question in there about foam padding around the wire rope safety barrier posts. And I've put those in, but I'll tell you now, I kind of put them in as a PR device rather than a road safety device. I just wanted my wire rope safety barrier system down the middle of the road, and we're having motorcyclists, picketing our head office and the like. So we put the what we call a stack cushion on each of the posts. Now, the reason I say they're a bit more a PR device, they've not been tested. There are none of them that have been tested under the European crash test protocol, and they won't pass. Right? The reason why they won't pass is because you're trying to absorb energy. With a bit of padding. It's like a footy goalpost padding, right? So yes, at some speed of a rider hitting it, to absorb the energy, and we're going to take it from a death down to a lesser crash in terms of injury, or take a serious injury down to nothing. Right? But but that'll be some specific speed, and it certainly is not within that sort of 60 km/h speed of strike, because you're asking too much out of the physics of that compression at that speed. You need the redirection that we saw in that video to get that reduction. So that's the one area where the motorcycle lobby groups who are really angry about wire rope safety barrier systems have there's some merit to it, because we don't have a great retrofit. But the reality is these days, and the one I was talking to you about, or I mentioned there, where we put those stack cushions on, that was before we had a back-to-back flexible W-beam system, and we wanted that flexibility of the barrier system to reduce the severity of crashes for passenger vehicles, and it was really the right system at the time. But now I just do a back-to-back, probably do back-to-back easy guard with underrun protection, or back-to-back whatever other flexible barriers, and give it a great safety benefit for all road users. So if you find yourself at a point where you're starting to worry about motorcycle safety from that perspective, your flexible W-beam system with underarm protection is you go every time. But as I say, I mean, when you're doing the big freeway upgrade, Hume freeway upgrade, or something like that, it's the wire rope safety barrier system has wonderful properties for passenger vehicles, can be often done a little bit cheaper, and it's still our most flexible barrier system for passenger vehicles, which gives us great advantages. Obviously, we want to think about heavy vehicles as well, and design and choose barriers appropriately. Yeah, so the cheese cutter, it's not, there have been no cases where motorcyclists have hit the wires and the wires have done particular damage to the rider, but I take that back, because there has been one. It was the end terminal, though. It was where the wires were entering into the or connected to the road, and that was the issue. But the idea that it would slice up a motorcyclist, no, they hit it and they go over the top, just the way they would with any other barrier system. But I mean, you've got to give the motorcyclists who don't like wire rope safety barrier systems some credit in terms of sort of communications and PR 101, because, you know, it would be get a vivid analogy, cheese cutter, and make everybody just continue to say that, and people will remember it and be very convinced by it, which, yeah, seems to be the way. Anyway, I spent a lot of time talking to motorcycle groups about this topic and finding appropriate solutions. And speed. Speed really, for motorcyclists, we're going to, speed limit reductions work, really good advisory speeds work, as long as we're consistent with our advisory speeds for the route. So get your, ensure you've done your gypsy track or whatever, and you've got everything all good from that perspective. Reduces the likelihood and sometimes severity of crashes. The reason I say sometimes severity, it will reduce the severity of crashes, but if we're able to reduce motorcycle speeds from 110 to 100, we're still in the area of maximum severity for motorcyclists in terms of crashes. So what you find when you do a safe system assessment is that if you're up there in those hundreds and 90s and 80s even, it's all the maximum score for severity for motorcyclists. That's a 4 when we do some scoring. So yeah, we have limitations in managing that severity, and that's why it's going to be very hard for us to, plot out a vision 0 with motorcyclists the way we currently operate motorcyclists. Anyway, so we sort of covered a nice base of content there around the safe system philosophy, exposure likelihood severity, We've talked through different road users. We've done some energy intersection analysis. We've talked about movement in place. We've talked about pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists. And we're at a nice point now where we can dive into how we actually put some scores to some of these risks that we've been talking about and how we categorize treatments and the like. And so next year, we'll all get together again and we'll find some local sites, and we will get the Safe System Assessment Framework out. And we don't need to cover off any of the stuff we've covered now because you're all up to speed on that. And we can pretty quickly jump into scoring and how you'd specifically score sites, and then we'll go out. We'll have a look at a few sites, you'll score them up, and you'll sort of present your safe system assessment back. I'm looking forward to that. At that point, I will pause and see if anybody has any questions about sort of finalizing the course, the online component of the course. Pause there, and I'll just jump into Moodle as well, just to check. So you're going to have a quiz at the end of this session. Just one final little quiz, and you have to put in the assignment as well. I just share my screen. That's okay. Okay, so hopefully you're all in Moodle, as many of you are. There's a few resources in there you might have seen. I'll put in there, I'll also put that New South Wales Movement in Place Safe System document. I'll unhide these fact sheets for you. So you're seeing the back end here. So make sure you've done all the quizzes, upload your assignment 2 for those who haven't done it yet. And once you've done that and it's marked, you need to just do a little bit of course feedback for the online component of this, and then your certificate will appear. Once you've completed everything, successfully got above 80%, done the quizzes, submitted the assignment, feedback, certificate will appear for you. Okay. Doesn't look like there's any other questions that have come in. So thank you very much. Oh, hang on. When will the scores be through for the assignment? In the next couple of days, you'll get that. So finish off this last quiz, and in the next couple of days, that'll be ready for you. And remember, you've got 3 attempts at everything, so don't get stressed out about it. You know, if you want to have a chat with me about some specifics of it, let me know. We can organize a one-on-one Zoom or a phone call or something like that, and we'll make sure that you get through and get that knowledge and pass the course. And then I think you'll really enjoy the actual act of safe system assessing some of your local sites, and I'm really looking forward to doing that with you. Thank you very much, everybody. See you in Feb. Bye.